Hello, my name is Rodrigo Sandoval Almazan. I am professor at the Social Science School at the State Autonomous University of Mexico in the state of Mexico. Welcome to this short lesson about open government in Mexico. This is going to be a very rough overview about what is happening in the area of open government. So we're going to see some of the main aspects. We're going to try to understand a little about the background or the history of open government. We're going to talk about laws and regulations that conforms open government, some institutions, the main challenges and outcomes that this open government has built so far, and we are going to finalize our presentation with some research of mine about open government in local governments, particularly speaking about some comparative benchmarking rankings of 2017. And if we have time, we are going to talk about some conclusion comments. So let's start. About background. Well, the first thing is that open government in Mexico comes from 2000, more or less, with the President Ernesto Zedillo, when he opened the documents and files of Mexican governments to public. But this occurs without any law. So the next government is different political party government. The first political party that was held by President Vicente Fox, and he started with a law of transparency and open government. This transparency law was published on June 2002, and the idea was to force the people of the government, bureaucratic people, public officials, public servants in general terms, of all agencies that mandatory release their documents to the population in general terms. So this law was the first stepping stone of the following laws of open government. And it creates the main principles of open government, but it was based on the idea that transparency is the main goal that Mexican government has to reach. So the open government ideal or the open government theoretical foundation was abandoned somehow by this administration. Next, please. We have several regulations after this one. What was created by President Vicente Fox was the regulation, and then it conforms a new agency to operationalize all of these processes of transparency. Some of the contents of these laws are already placed here in the slide. As you will see, the main thing was to release open government, open data, but the second was to ensure about the personal data by the public servants or the public officials was protected. Not only their data of personal affairs, but mostly data related to their wages or their income. And this is one of the key points to this law that then was reformulated in the future laws. The next thing was that this law of transparency helped to reorganize the government structures. And this reorganization was held by adaptation, we can say, that the government agencies needs to adapt their processes and their storage, and to have the people specialize in learning how to save documents, how to digitalize documents to make it open in the websites. So all of these processes has to be done by the first time for organizations. And this law intends to foster that kind of activities. The next law that was updated was called the General Law of Transparency and Access to Public Information. And this law was, very large update because it creates it expands, we can say, the opportunities to have more open government. The previous law only guarantees or forces the government to open in the federal level. All agencies on federal government was mandatory first to open their documents. Then this law was approved by any local government, and every local government creates their own law to open their documents. But what is happened, it was that a lot of other agencies that receives public funding was not subject of this law. And this creates a problem because these agencies has not to be accounted for the government and for the public in general, the media. So the next generation of this law includes more agencies that receives public funding. Some of these agencies are particularly important, such as syndicates, political parties, trusts, public fundings, and every part of the government that receives money from the budget of the government. So next, please. This increases or expands the term, but it also increases the possibility to make account for the government. And it also creates a new institution that we're going to see in the next slides to manage all of these documents, all the problems that has to be solved by the transparency meeting. So nowadays, the federal law regulates the open government in Mexico, and this is the General Law on Transparency and Access to Public Information. This is the third law, and the new input is that they add this personal information guarantees. The previous laws only release the data, but on this law, they try to protect the personal information data from all the citizens in Mexico, not only from the public servants. Well, the next law, but this is not a law, this is a decree. It was released or published on February 2015. And this decree is specifically for open government data. The idea of this decree is that to provide the public servants enough tools and regulations to foster this new trend of open government data. We're going to talk about this later on, but for now, this is the most updated law in Mexico. Is a complementary part from the federal law, and this decree is just to focus the operationalization of any government of any level, municipal, local, or federal, to produce open government data. So, we're going to see now about the institutions that were formed by the open government trend in Mexico. The first institution that was created was this System Information Requests. This is mostly a software, but it was held by the second institution. The second was called the Federal Institute of Access of Public Government Information. And this was created with the first law. And as you can see, the main idea is to provide access to the information. In order to provide this access was the creation of this System Information Requests. In Mexico, all Mexicans has allowed to ask any level of government to solve certain doubts. So you fill a format and you ask what you want to know. Could be wages, could be budget, anything. Could be any data from 3 years old, from the past administration, whatever you want, you have that possibility. And the agency has 20 days to give you an answer. If the agency does not give you an answer, you can submit the request to the federal level or even to the local level. If it was municipal. So you can go to the next level and ask to solve this question. And this is mandatory by law. And if there is any agency that does not want to provide you with the information, and it was not an information related to national security or something like that, this agency could be sanctioned by the federal agency, that in this case is the EFI. The next agency is changed the name only because it's the same agency, but it was changed on May the 5th, 2015, when the new law, the second one, that it was General Law of Transparency and Access to Public Information, creates this new agency that now it calls National Institute of Transparency, Access to Information, and Protection of Personal Data. We talked about this a few minutes earlier, but the main idea is that this is a more complete or integrated agency that not only solves the requests from the people, not only foster the idea to open the data into all the government's levels, it is also focused on protect the personal data. Okay, the next please. Along with this institution, INAI, that is the new one, is the actual one. It creates a website. It creates a one-stop entry website that it calls the National Transparency Platform. The idea of this National Transparency Platform, you are seeing right now this, the screenshot of this agency, it was a complete failure because the idea it was that everybody, municipal level, local level, and federal level agencies of the government has this platform as a one-stop, a single stop for all the requests. So they have to upload their data and they have to download the requests from the citizens. But it was a total failure because it was not very good built. They surprised about the amount of data of all government agencies that wanted to upload their data or the request that they receive nationwide. So right now this is a very huge problem for the Transparency Institute because they are trying to figure it out how to solve this problem of data, and they spend a lot of money on building this website. That it could be understood as a third institution, but it is an internet-based institution. It's like a virtual agency just focused on transparency in the Mexican government. Next, please. So once we understand about this overview, let's see a little about the challenges and the outcomes of this open government in Mexico. For example, more recently, the CIDE, this is a Center for Research in Mexico, has released the first report that analyzed open government in Mexico. And it based its metrics in three main pillars. One is open government. Second one is participation, citizen participation. And third one, you imagine, is transparency. So according to their data, they found in a scale of 0 to 1 that we are fail in this case. For example, Mexico obtains 0.39, less than half, and the open government idea obtains 0.50, but the worst case is citizen participations. It obtains 0.28. Imagine how frustrating is this result when we invest a lot of money in a National Institute for Transparency on all government levels, on 2,000 municipalities, on 32 states, and finally this institution found that this was wrong, or it was not acceptable for open government. So this is one of the main challenges right now. Next, please. In the legal aspect, well, you can see at the slide some of the main challenges. I'm just going to focus in very few of them. Most important is that we have ambiguous functions. I mean, the same thing that is happening in the municipal level, it's happening in the local government level. So we have this problem. The two agencies are doing the same in different levels, but they are doing the same. So we spend resources on this part. The other problem is that some local governments give an interpretation to the federal law in with a different meaning. So these differences of understanding and differences to apply the law, it's one of the problems, the big problems in the open government implementation. Another challenge is about organization. As you may be aware, we have two large, very, very large organizations that they spend more than 1 million pesos, 1,000 million pesos, just to do this hobby. And they are not doing something that has a public revenue for citizens. So it's a large, very, very large buildings, a lot of people working there. They duplicate functions again, but the other problem is that the coordination among different levels of government is sometimes is very rare, sometimes it doesn't exist, and some other times it is a friction or a problem because they belong to a different political party than the one that is ruling that right now. We have a data portal, datos.gov.mx is the data portal, and it's not completely filled with the data of all the governments. And also we have a federal government portal that is only .gov.mx. This federal portal, it could duplicate the function from the data portal, because what contains the government portal is, of course, data of the government. So another obstacle, next please, is the social and cultural challenges. Yes, we have a lot of people that ask for information in Mexico, but most of these people are journalists, researchers, and some students that they have the homework to do by the government, but that's all. This culture of openness, this culture of transparency is just starting. So many people don't use these paths to extract the information from the government. So as you can see, Mexican receive transparency information through the internet, the 65%. So many people does not need to fill the form. They receive the information immediately. So the other problem is that once we have the information, for example, the budget information, we don't have the people to understand this information because we have not developed people or professionals with data skills. Okay, there are not a lot of universities that has or promotes the data science to interpret or to reorganize these data. And finally, we have a very dispersed strategy of policies and agencies to promote the idea of open government in Mexico. The next challenge is about this data. As I mentioned earlier, we have a website that is called datos.gov.mx, and right now we have 27,000 records from 237 federal agencies. And this is very, very, very small quantity of records for the large government. In Mexico, we have more than 2,000 agencies, different agencies from different levels. So imagine if we have only 237 agencies that are uploading data, it's very few number of what is the total sample of Mexicans agencies in the government. But of course we have nothing or we have zero a few years ago. So this is a very good contribution, but well, it is also a problem. As you can see over here, the main data sets are focused on federal auctions, social programs, air pollution, federal budget, and so far. But this is a secondary option from the National Platform of Transparency that we talk later. And this National Platform Transparency must be the one that it really has all the information from the government. In my view, it has two different outcomes. One is through the National Platform of Transparency, and the other one is datos.gov.mx. So we don't need two things. We need just one. I mean, I'm go for the datos.gov.mx and without the transparency platform. But well, that's not up to me. So the data sets are part of the strategy of disperse information through all the formats. As you can see, there is a lack of citizen-centered policy of openness. I mean, these portals and these ideas are not focused to solve the citizens' information needs. It's only part of the bureaucratic idea of how to deal with this problem of open government and transparency. How can we do that in the best way? How can we make an artificial portal, not just to release all the data, just the data that we want? So this is the struggle in which Mexican government is running right now at the end of the administration of Enrique Peña Nieto. Next, so those are the challenges. So in open government, in the local area, I have been doing some research. I made a benchmarking, a comparative benchmarking between the different local governments. We have 32 local governments, and each one of them has a website. In this transparency website, they publish the data that is mandatory from the government, but also they publish any other kind of data that they want. So I have been doing this since 2005, so I have a large sample. Every year I publish this ranking, and it's only focused on transparency in the websites. It's not the transparency of the whole local government. That is important, and I want to remark, because people could confuse and say this is the report of transparency, but it is not. It is just only from the website. So in this screen, I'm just showing a comparative between 2016 and 2017, and this is the total points that they obtain. As you are aware, this is, well, the blue one is 17, the orange one is 16, and you can see that they have a lot of changes. I mean, they move from one year to the other year. This is orderly in an alphabetic manner. So, well, you can see that there are some states like this one. This is Colima, for example, that it was in with a high number in 2016, and it goes down to 2017. And the competition between all of these states, it is very high. So they want to be in the first place every year, and they do something. They change, they create more participation with the citizens, they implement social media actions. So they can do everything by the law, but they can have as creative as they want. So, conclusion. One conclusion is that Mexico is just about starting about open government. The idea of transparency, as you may see in this presentation, is widely open and is widely exploded. Actually, Mexico has something that they call active or proactive transparency. However, this idea of open government is just to start 1 year or 2 years ago, and they want to include the transparency efforts that they are doing right now. But as you may aware, because of these readings of open government, the open government partnership, and all the efforts worldwide about open government, well, transparency is not open government. It's part of the open government. It could be understood as a section or as an operative part of open government. It could help to open government implementation, but open government is a more wider concept and a more wider alternative for the public administrations right now. In the special case of Mexico, we are starting to understand how this concept can be implemented in the federal government, local government, and municipal government. So far, we have some transparency actions. We have very good advance in organizing files, in organizing government information, and dealing with these problems, as we mentioned in the challenges. Well, that's all for today. I hope that you like this session. And well, any questions or doubts, just ask Mila for giving my email. And well, that's all for today. Thank you very much for joining me on this session.